Hello, everybody. Thank you for spending some time today and coming to Jalon Bell's funeral. My name is Jeff Bell. I'm Jalon's oldest son, and my family appreciates all the time that you've spent and will spend with us here in the next half hour or so, remembering Jalon and talking a little bit about her life and what she meant to all of us. If you grew up in this part of town, especially in the 50s or the 60s, you may have known Mom as Jalon K. Gokin. Us kids, we just called her Mom. Her friends called her Joe for short. And so what I'd like to do is maybe just spend a little bit of time and tell you what Joe was really good at, what she liked, and what she hopefully meant to you guys, and what you guys and all her friends and family and old Hal and young grade school family friends meant to her. She was a good sister and a child, I think. She was born the second child in the Gokin family to Walter and Fern. She had an older sister named Jane, who was 5 years older. Jane eventually got married to Chuck McMullen, and there were some similarities between Jane and Joe. Jane, when she met Chuck, was at Howe High School. He played basketball. They married and had 4 great kids. Joe, 5 years later, went to Howe, met Bob Bell, or Dr. Bell, as some of you may have known him, and had 4 pretty good kids. But the sisters, and Jane, by the way, can't be here today. She's 89, she's up in Milwaukee. She doesn't travel well, but one of her daughters, Terry and Dave Hurdle, are here. And we're going to be recording as much of this as we can, if I know how to use my cell phone, and we're going to share this with Jane afterwards. But they had a unique relationship for over 80 years that they've been together. Their parents, Vern and Walter died when they were pretty young, and so my brother Scott is going to talk about how that unfortunate circumstance kind of kept them here in Indianapolis and brought them even closer together, throughout their lives. And one of the things that Jane and Joe had for all those 80 plus years, and especially here later in life, is that Mom would always call Janie. I think it was 8 o'clock every night, and if she could make it on the phone, they'd just talk and catch up about stuff. What the McMullens and the Hurdles and all the extended family were doing, and then whenever I called her, she would always then give me the entire download about what had happened. And she was like that with all you guys. The Smith family, Ron, Dave, Danny, Dee Dee and Debbie, Aunt Ruth, the friends from Howe, the Howe reunion group, anybody and everybody that she talked to, we always got the latest, here's what we ate when we were at the meeting. Here's who this person is doing, what their kids and family are doing, and so she was just that type of a person. I think Joe was a good classmate at Howe High School. She was in the Steps Club, and later in life, she was, like I mentioned, involved in the reunion activities. She really loved and valued those relationships. I think maybe it was the 40th or the 50th year, I can't remember what it was, but she was on the reunion group. I remember looking through her stuff, and you guys that are Hal produced a pamphlet or a book with everybody in it. I couldn't find her name in it. It was because up front in the first page, she and some of the other people that were organizing it, had their names moved up there. But she loved going and planning those types of things and talked about them often. She would talk about all her friends at Howe, and I'm going to list off some of the names of the people. I apologize if you're not on it. But she really liked the folks here on the east side, And these are some of the people that I called when she passed away as soon as I could, just to let them know, because I know they and you cared about her and she cared about you guys. You know, Jim and Judy Ayers and the Ayers family. She loved and talked about Jim and Jan Spears, who I think have both passed away. Jim and Sandy Burke, who are here, were here today. Judy and Paul Strange, Kitty and Dave Stewart, Ann and Kent Stewart, Charlie Campbell, Charlie Bone, Anita and Bob Wright, Jim and Pat Stutz, Judy and Bob McClellan, who were also, you know, friends there in that little neighborhood over by 77. Bob and Susan Little. Susan was, I think, the daughter of Tom Sterling, who was one of the neighbors across the street and was the principal at Howe for a while. Dave and Jackie Witzel and Linda and Jack Baker. Some of them couldn't be here today because they live down in Florida and they're getting along in years, but they all send their regards. Joe was a good traveler and travel organizer. One of the things that she liked to do and did a good job was we would go to Panama City Beach, Florida for a vacation. And so a lot of the Howe and that group at the time would pack us, Joe would pack us up, Dad would yell at her, you know, Jelon, you know, get the kids together, we gotta get going, get on the road. And so we drive, I don't know, what was it, 10, Judy, 12 hours, something like that down there. And we would have a great time. Panama City was just a little small spot on a map. And the Blue Dolphin, you know, was just a nice little hotel, but we had, what?
It was a dump.
It was a dump. But it was a fun dump, and like Judy said, we'd get water balloons on the second floor and throw them at the girls that were sunbathing and things like that. Another thing that Joe did in terms of travel organizer is that when we were younger, we figured out that we had cousins. I didn't know what a cousin was, but we had cousins. These people called the McMullins. It was Jane and Chuck. Chuck worked for GE and Jack Welch, and he moved around a lot. And so Mom would pack us up and take us over to Virginia Beach, I think, one year, New York City another year. Eventually they settled in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And so one of the things Dad would do would be shut down the chiropractic practice for about 2 weeks. Mom would pack us up, get the bologna and cheese sandwiches with Brunswager, you know, a thermos of lemonade, put us in the car, and we'd make a 5-hour trip up to Milwaukee.
Don't forget the tinkle can.
I wasn't going to tell that. When you were in the car with Bob and Joe, Joe taught us how not to take a rest stop. We would just pee in a tinkle can and throw it out the window. I know she wouldn't like for you to know that, but you know, she was that type of frugal person, right? And then we would drive another 5 hours up to Minocqua, Wisconsin, and we would have the best time of our lives up there. Jane and Joe, I think Bob and Chuck called them J&J's Bar and Grill because while they were out pulling us skiing around Lake Catherine up near Minocqua, Jane and Joe would, you know, cook, make sure that we had plenty to eat. They'd go to the grocery store in Minocqua, come back with 12 bags of groceries. Bob and Chuck would stand there at the front door after 8 kids had, you know, run them ragged and go, "Where have you girls been?" Like they were out, you know, having an affair with somebody in Minocqua. And so we had a really good time. Mom was good at, you know, getting us together and being that travel organizer to get us on these long roads and make a 10-hour trip without stopping to go to the bathroom. So, the other thing that Mom was good at was, I think she was a good bartender at the J&J Bar and Grill. I don't know if you remember Dad, he liked gin and tonics, and Uncle Chuck liked those too, and Jane and Joe would make those. For those guys, I think that they had some kind of foo-foo drinks. I could never get gin and tonic past my nose, but you know, she was good at that and kept Bob happy. I think she was a good in-law. The Smith family, you know, Dan, Dave, Ronnie, Debbie, Dee Dee, Aunt Ruth, Dad's half-sister, right, Ronnie? We enjoyed going up to their place. It was always around the holidays. And, you know, she loved you guys. I never heard her complain She was always anxious to talk to you guys, Aunt Ruth and all the kids. We enjoyed going down to Edinburgh when, Greg and Debbie had the place down there. She had, I think, Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, on Dad's side, Aunt Gertrude, Aunt Gertie, Aunt Myrtle, Aunt Blanche, Aunt Naomi. She liked the aunts. Aunt Myrtle babysit us 4 kids, and we were probably little hellions at the time, but she'd keep coming back, and Mom enjoyed that extended family that she had with the Smiths and that part of Dad's family also. Joe was also a good neighbor. We had a lot of, just reminiscing, a lot of good neighbors around us. The Smalls, the Whites across the street, and the Sterlings. Tom and Eva Sterling were kind of across and next door. Tom was the principal of Howe High School for several years, and they've both passed. But Eva was, back in the day, she was manic depressive, and so when she was in a down state, she'd be there, at the house. But when she was up, she was in her bathrobe, running across the street, talking to Joe, and Mom, I didn't understand it at the time. I was a young kid, but Mom would talk to her, and they had a really good relationship. As part of that, I had no idea about this, but as we've been going through Mom's stuff in the house for the last couple of days, I ran across a letter that came from Kitty Stewart. Kitty was helping my mom from time to time with her arrangements and legal aspects of her estate, but this letter was a little bit different. It said this: instructions from Thomas Sterling. Dear Jalon, as you may know, I met with Tom Sterling in the months prior to his death and to prepare his living will and appointment as healthcare representative. I also received some instructions from him to work with Susan as attorney for his estate and Eva's, to see to it that his appreciation for your love and care and concern for the last several years has made manifest. To that end, I've enclosed a check along with words of thanks and instruction, quote unquote, with gratitude to Jalon Bell, a $5,000 gift to be used for something special she would enjoy, a trip, a fur coat, something out of the ordinary. The only stipulation is that the money be spent during the next 12 months and the purchases be reported to Kitty Stewart as my attorney. And Kitty, ended it very well, and I haven't talked to Kitty, but I want to ask her, did Mom actually ever go out and spend that money? Because, that wasn't like her. I joked with somebody that, if Dad, Bob, got the check, probably went into the bank to pay the bills or something like that. But I think that's just one of the many things that, Mom was a good neighbor, and the Sterling example, I think, is a good one. She was also a good receptionist. She worked for my dad at the chiropractic office for many years. He bought the Regal office, and Maxine Regal worked for him for a while. Then Norma Hicks was his secretary. Sometimes my wife Carol or Tammy would fill in, and they would have two or three rooms going at once, and Mom would take care of all that. Back in that day, they'd put you on the heat pad, and basically they said, hey, if it gets too hot, just scream. Right? But Mom did a good job at that. Nobody screamed, nobody sued Dad, and so I think she passed. Joe was a good caretaker, especially for Dad. I remember, if I heard it once, I heard it 1,000 times. Jalon, would you give me a dish of ice cream? And Dad would do that. Dad was on oxygen for about 5 years when he got COPD in the late 90s. And, Mom put a lot of her health problems aside just to, wait on my dad and try and get him through that part of his life. And so, I think she was a good caretaker. She wasn't a complainer. I've heard that from many people today. She had rheumatoid arthritis for many years, 2 ankle fusions. Her hands were a little bit gnarled. She had osteoporosis, 2 compression fractures. But to call her and talk to her, you just wouldn't hear that. And more often than not, she'd probably say, well, how are you doing? She really didn't want to talk about herself. She was a good driver. Back in the 60s, she had Fern's Studebaker. I think they either bought or inherited that from from them. And, you know, there was, seat belts weren't invented yet. And so when we were driving on the bench seats and you came to a stop, Mom would put the arm out to stop you from going through the windshield. She drove us, many people mention this, to the Miramar Swimming Club, you know, back in the day to, you know, get us out there during the summer. We had several station wagons, Country Squire with the fake wood on the side, 2 Dodge Monacos, and we had a turquoise station wagon that actually had a push-button transmission, you know, drive, reverse, and she learned how to drive all those things. She filled in with Judy Strange and Jenny, you know, taking us to carpool to the Howe High School, and did that, you know, she got us through, you know, a lot of our childhood in all those vehicles with all these different people. Joe was a supportive person and a parent, I think. My 2 examples to kind of prove this to me, and maybe you have others, to those of you that think I'm a, you know, just a guy with, you know, no bad history in my background, here's the story. Senior year, Joe Ayers and I and Roger McClellan, we decided we'd go drinking after a Howe football game. I think I bought a bag of pot. This was the first bag of pot I'd ever bought in my life. Joe goes into a liquor store, it's staked out, we get pulled over on Short Ridge and 10th Street right after a Howe football game, and so everybody is going back and forth. ABC, which I thought at the time was the, you know, the news station, was called out to look at us. It's really the Alcoholic Beverage Commission. Long story short, we had a night of all that, we went home. Roger never got in trouble, Bob and Jenny never found out about it, but the Ayers family and the Bell parents, you know, found out about it, and we caught hell. Dad was disappointed, Mom not so much. She was really supportive and caring, and she took me down to my probation officer and the judge that I had to see, which, you know, was just a one-time event, and that was the last thing I ever did along those lines. But, you know, where Dad gave me the cold shoulder for about 6 months or a year, you know, Mom was always, you know, I'm disappointed in you, you need to be a better person, don't ever do that again type of thing. That was example number 1. Example number 2 was when I graduated college from IU in 1982. The economy wasn't the best back then, I didn't know that. I got a job at Northwestern Mutual selling life insurance. They hired me on Monday and then they fired me on Friday. And so I walked into the house where we were at on Bolton. About 2 o'clock, Mom says, "You're home early. What happened? Did you get fired?" And I said, "Yep." You know, she didn't make a big deal out of it. She was supportive. I think I got a job selling copy machines for a company. That lasted 6 months. I was in the car driving back to the office. Lee Corso was the IU football coach at the time. The news hit that he had just gotten fired. And I thought, well, son of a gun, I feel sorry for Lee. I had, you know, known him when I was at IU. At least I got a job. Well, 15 minutes later, I didn't have a job. Walked in to the house again, about 2 o'clock, and Mom said, "Are you home again early again? Did you get fired again?" "Yes, Mother, I did." And so, you know, she was, where Dad may have been a little tougher on me, she was the softer supporter side, and I always appreciated that. Mom was a good grocery shopper. I think back in the day, Dad would give her 20 bucks, and that's what she had for the week to go out and make, you know, meals for us. I remember our meals usually consisted of bacon in the morning that she would cook in a pan. Grease made Dad's eggs, bologna and Brent's-Wager and cheese sandwiches for lunch. Dad liked to eat peanut butter and mayonnaise sandwiches, something like that. You know, that was the diet of the day. And on the weekends, we'd get popcorn. She had a yellow Pyrex bowl that she'd pop that corn, and we'd have root beer floats or, you know, brown cows, whatever you call them. And, you know, she made the money that Dad gave her last. She was also a good cook. She cooked bacon. Well, I just said that. She'd do the bacon, the root beer floats. Joe Ayers reminded me the other day that, you know, he'd come over and spend the night, and we'd get up in the morning and she'd make donuts in some little deep fryer. That started, you know, the Gokin sweet tooth, the long love of donuts that she had and I had. But she was a really good cook. She loved to eat. And I think I've told a couple of you that's what she told us and me in the hospital when we brought her home. She didn't want to be on a feeding tube. She enjoyed that part of life, and she didn't want to live that way. And, Jeffy, I love to eat, take me home. And so that was her wish. Joe was a good teacher, I think. Back in the 60s, Bob and Joe would host parties at their house. They'd drink, play cards, play some music. They'd stick us down in the basement, and at the night, as it would end, Dad would get a little bit drunk. He liked to get us and talk about the Bell Dynasty, sticking together as a family and kids. I really never understood what it meant at the time, but I guess I remember it made me think we need to stick together as a family. Mom at that point would take us upstairs, put us to bed, and we would say prayers. To this day, 50 years later, my brothers and sister and I can still recite those same prayers word for word that we said hundreds, if not probably thousands of times. And so she was a good teacher in that respect. She taught us things that we remembered and will remember for the rest of our lives. She was also a good gardener. She liked to get flowers, or is it brown-eyed Susans? Black-eyed Susans in the front. She loved her tomato plants, and she liked to have those on the side of her house. We still to this day, I think Judy was telling me, we've got the potted plants upstairs, the geraniums, yeah, that she's been, keeping going for 10, maybe 12 years. She was a good grandparent, I think. If her grandkids are here and will confirm this, she'd either like to call you or send you, a birthday card with maybe a little bit of money in it, every year, as often as she could. I don't know if she did it every year, but that was important to her to get that out to you guys. She was a good sports fan. She liked, and especially in the later years, to listen to her talk sports guys. She watched basketball and paid attention to stuff that I didn't. I think Steph Curry was her, favorite point guard, and she'd tell me about what team he was on or how many points he'd score, and she liked to listen to that. Last but not least, and I think I've been talking about this, she was a good friend. Again, after every meeting that she'd have with all her Howe friends and whether it's family, if we weren't there, we would get the summary of what was said, again, what you guys ate. She loved that. She liked to have that phone call with Aunt Janie every night, if she could, and talk about, the Bells and the McMullins and the extended families. And she really loved all of you. For all of you that are here and have made the time today and, have talked to me or my brothers and sisters on the phone, she loved you all. She thought a lot about you. Even in these last days, she would ask me questions. Have you talked to so-and-so? Call Judy Strange. She may be on a cruise, but, I need for you to call and talk to her. And so I hope you remember her that way. My brothers and maybe my sister may have some other things to say, and I'll ask them to come up here, and then we'll wrap up. I've got a letter from Charlie Bone that I'd like to, no, Charlie Campbell. I always got the Charlies mixed up. Charlie Campbell I'd like to read to you, and another letter from Jamie Hurdle, who's one of Joe's sister's, Jane's grandkids, that was very thoughtful and touching. Who's next?
Well, Jeff about covered everything. For those of you that don't know, I'm Steve Bell. I'm the second son, the middle child. I didn't really have a whole lot of time to work on this, so I'm just gonna tell some stories about my mom. Here are some things I learned from my mom. When making a decision between two options, pick the one that's easier on you, especially if there's no downside. And I don't know if my brothers and sister even know this, but my mom gave me the sex talk when I was 4 years old. I was in her living room while she was pregnant with Tammy. She was folding some clothes, and she asked if I wanted to feel her stomach because the baby was kicking or dancing or something. And so I did, and then I asked Mom a question. I said, "So how did Tammy get in there?" Well, she explained the process, using all the bad words and everything. And I took it all in and thought about it for a minute. And then I asked a second question. I said, "So when the man's car is in the woman's garage, what would happen if all of a sudden he has to make pee-pee?" Well, my mom didn't bat an eye. She explained to me about the two different systems that were competing for control, and how in this scenario, the fun system competing for control always gets to take the wheel.
Your mother's gonna kill you.
After that, I'm sure my mom thought, only a little boy born with a technical engineering geek mind would even think about asking such a question. And sure enough, at Christmas time, when I was a little bit older, while my brothers received the usual fun toys, I started receiving electronic projects and build your own computer kits as my Christmas gifts. I was a true geek kid in no time. Now, I think my mom may have regretted this decision about giving me the sex talk a couple of years later when I was in first grade. I came home one day after school into the kitchen, and Mom told Jeff that I knew the alphabet now and was learning to spell too. Jeff said, "Steve, spell something for me." So I said the first thing that came to my mind, and it was the three-letter word, T-I-T. Jeff burst out laughing, and I'm sure my mom thought right then and there, what was I thinking, giving a sex talk to a 4-year-old? I've created a monster. Okay. The next thing I learned from my mom, being perfect is the enemy of being good enough. I don't know in any of the pictures if any of you noticed, but I'm the only Bell kid that didn't have braces. And I kind of remember one day when I was young, my parents came up to me and said, "Steve, we want to look inside your mouth." And so I opened up my mouth and they looked and looked for a little bit longer, and then they went into another room, shut the door. Now, I don't actually know what transpired, what that conversation was like, but I have an idea. I think Dad said, "Joe, I see 3 jacked up teeth in there." And while I was shutting the door, I had a premonition that probably in about 20 or 30 years from now, one of those teeth, Steve will probably be out partying with some friends, trip and fall, knock it out, and get it replaced on his own dime. So we don't have to worry about that right now. But these other 2 teeth, the one on the left, the one on the right, they're just a little bit crooked. So he said, "Joe, follow me. If we move this one a couple millimeters, and move this one maybe 3 millimeters, it'll be perfect. But we have 2 choices. A, we can leave it just good enough and save that $4,000, and in 5 or 6 years, buy a nice little ski boat for the lake. Or we can spend that money and move those 4 millimeters. And I think Mom thought it over and thought to herself, well, Bob, if you can find a boat that will last a good 10, 15, or even 20 years, then maybe I'll think about it. Well, we all know what the decision was, because we still have that boat to this day, and it didn't last 10, 15, or 20 years, it's lasted over 40 years. Okay, another thing I learned from my mom, sometimes you have to take one for the team, but I also think this is an example of my mom always putting herself first. When I was a sophomore up at Purdue, I was rooming with Scott Pfeiffer, a good friend of mine from Howe in grade school, and we had a real nice room, and Scott had one of those older Ford TV consoles or whatever, and it had broken, and so we were coming home for Thanksgiving, and so Mom drove up in the 2-door Honda Accord hatchback, and we loaded it, a bunch of other stuff we were bringing home, and so once we got it all packed, the 2 front seats were open, but there was only this much room in the back that was not filled with stuff. And so everyone looked at each other, and Mom said, okay, lay on my back and hold my knees up to my chest and put my arms over my legs to secure them. I think I can fit back in that little spot. And so she climbed in there and contorted herself to fit in that little spot. And as I grabbed the hatch, I said, Mom, take a deep breath, and then I shut it. And she rode an hour and 15 minutes back from Purdue, crunched up in that little position. I felt horrible, but evidently not that horrible. Okay, another thing I learned, how are we doing on time? Do I need to wrap this up? Bubba?
Keep going.
Okay. Another thing I learned from her was always have fun, but always be responsible. Let's see, a good friend of mine who lives in Irvington, or lived in Irvington at the time, had a party at her house. I'm not going to mention her name because her dad's here too, and I don't think he ever found out about the party. But that night I went with my friends, and we I had gotten a bottle of Bacardi 151 rum and had some of it over at her place, and when the night was over, I was feeling pretty good, and I was coming home and trying to pull the car in the driveway. Well, I was focusing so much on what I was doing that I didn't realize that Mom's Bridge Club was leaving or letting out at the same time, and there was a car backing out of the driveway concurrently. And so the next morning, my mom said, "What was that all about?" I said, "Well, I was at a party and I probably wasn't paying attention. Probably had a little bit too much to drink." She goes, "Huh?" She goes, "What'd you drink?" And I told her, and she goes, "Did you drink all of it?" And I said, "No." She goes, "Well, what'd you do with the bottle?" I said, "Well, before I came home, I hid it in the bushes back in the apartments behind us." She goes, "Are you kidding me?" She goes, "What happens if somebody's walking back there, finds the bottle, and takes it? Your alcohol would be gone." I go, "You are so right." She goes, "We're going right now back there and retrieving that bottle." And we both walked out the door, went back to the bushes. I got the bottle. She goes, "Now, take us upstairs and hide it behind the Encyclopedia Britannica set like you always do with your other ones." Gotta be responsible.
Oh, God.
Another time, this was the blizzard of '78. I was out bumper sliding with my friends. I don't know, if you don't know what bumper sliding is, it's when you hang out at an intersection, the light turns red, the cars stop, and you walk behind the car and slowly drop out of sight and hold on to their bumper. And when the light turns green, you hang on for dear life and see how far you can go. Well, we were going down Ritter, and a police officer saw us and pulled in behind us and flipped on the lights. Well, I wasn't about to get caught, so I let go. My buddies were still hanging on, but I let go and rolled a few times and took off running. Well, a couple minutes after that, I was in the backyard trying to run through 2 feet of snow, and I got tackled by the police officer and dragged back to the car. And they said, all right, well, these first two, since they didn't run, we're just going to take you home to your parents. But you, the clown, you're going to have to go down to juvie. Well, they took the first two home. They decided they'd take me home to my parents too. And when I got home, my mom said, what happened? And I started to tell her about the bumper sliding. She said, no. She said, you're missing one of your gloves. I said, well, when I let go and ran, the glove got stuck in the bumper, and it's still in the car. I lost it. She said, you know, gloves don't grow on trees. More responsible. I never did get in trouble for that. Okay, last story. In the newspaper, the Indianapolis Star, I think Ann Landers had a column, and I think maybe down below that there was maybe a hints from Heloise, and there may have been some other columns about DIY stuff. And my mom read that on occasion, and she came across this one thing. And as she got older, stuff started showing up on her face, you know, bumps or splotches or this or that. And so this DIY column said what you do is you take a little piece of toilet paper, roll it in a ball, soak it in vinegar, and then cut a strip of duct tape and tape that ball to your head. So one morning I wake up, Mom comes out of her bedroom. She has these 3 strips of gray shiny duct tape taped to her face. I go, Mom, what you got going on there? And so she explained to me about the article and how to do it and all that stuff, and I thought she was crazy. So a couple months later, I wake up one morning, look in the mirror. Now I got strips of duct tape on my face with little balls of vinegar. Now she's got me doing it too. Your parents do something and you think it's okay. Okay, I'm going to wrap up with this. And I didn't really realize this until I got home or got back from California and started living with her. Once you have a mom, it doesn't matter how old you both are, or how far away you live from each other, or how often you get to see each other, she'll never stop being your mom. And there's one thing I'll never stop doing either, and that's missing her.
Thank you for coming. I'm number 3, Scott. Unfortunately, I didn't get the sex talk or arrested or anything. So I must have learned a few things from my brothers. But I want to thank everybody for coming here today and being with us to celebrate my mom's life. She definitely had a full one at 83 years old. It was full of a lot of laughs and some crying, great joys, and some real heartaches. But she definitely was a very hard worker, and she had a lot of successes in life. And for many years, I've dabbled in genealogy, always intrigued by the lives of my parents and their ancestors. And when researching people's lives, you always notice this dash in between the date that somebody is born and the date that they pass. And within that dash is this big, whole, rich life that really is not conveyed very well in a genealogy website or an obituary or even a eulogy. So I'd like to just convey a little bit more about her life today and that little dash. Jeff's kind of hit on a couple of things, so I might be a little bit repetitive, but I was lucky to witness my mom's life, the majority of it, and benefit from her love, kindness, and guidance for over 57 years. My mom was born in Indianapolis in 1938 to, as Jeff mentioned, Wally and Fern Gokin. They were originally from Waterloo, Iowa. But when my mom was 5, and her and her sister and the family all moved over to North DeQuincy Avenue, which is just a couple miles from here. In 1945, my mom was only 6 and my Aunt Jane was 12. And her father, Wally Gokin, was tragically killed in an automobile accident. He was struck by a train on the way back from a business trip. He was a traveling salesman. And I can't imagine how my mom and my Aunt Jane felt by losing their father so early in their lives, and my grandmother losing the love of her life at that time. Out of that tragedy, though, my mom and her sister both remained here in Indianapolis, and where they attended school number 62 and then eventually Thomas Carr Howe High School. And that's where my mom made the majority of her friendships. She joined the Steps, as Jeff mentioned. A lot of those individuals, she remained lifelong friends. And I met a few from Tech today that I remember your names. And so she had lifelong friends that she enjoyed for many, many years. That was also at Howe High School, was where she met my dad, Bob Bell, and then my aunt met her husband, my Uncle Chuck, Chuck McMullen. After graduating in '56, she attended IU and was a member of the Alpha Chi Omega sorority. And but she only lasted there a year and a half because my dad wanted to marry her. And so she left and started working and to support my dad while he continued his education to become a chiropractor here in Indianapolis. Over the next 6 years, she started having babies. And so she had the 4 of us in 6 years, from 1960 when Jeff was born to '66 when Tammy was born. And so she definitely had her hands full with 4 kids under 6. And that kept her busy. In '64, the family moved to the house over at 1173 North Bolton, where she lived for over 57 years. She loved that house and never wanted to leave, and she made that very clear at the end of her life, or at least the last few years, when we would make these suggestions that maybe she should downsize a little bit and not have to do the laundry in the basement. But she did tell me one time how excited she was to buy that house back in 1964, because it had 4 bedrooms and a basement for the kids. And her and my dad really loved it. She was the caregiver of the family, and she tended to all our needs. As Jeff mentioned, she was a great cook, and she made fantastic desserts. Cheesecake was one of my favorites, and the chocolate Asian food cake was another one. She always did tremendous amounts of laundry, provided transportation to us for hundreds of practices and games, and worked, obviously, many years for my dad to probably save some money. Always very frugal, she was notorious for even cutting paper plates in half to save money. But it was that frugality that allowed her and my dad to purchase the first a lot, and then eventually a home at Lamb Lake, which our family and friends have enjoyed since the early 70s. I have many memories of her, my dad, entertaining friends at the lake, of her transporting his kids in the, as Jeff mentioned, the wood-paneled station wagon to the Miramar Club for a day of swimming. Spending spring break at the Blue Dolphin Hotel in Panama City, and that whole trip of being wedged in the back of the station wagon as we traveled down there. And she always would come up to Purdue and we'd have Mom's Weekend. And my mom, ever the frugal person, would always, didn't want to stay in a hotel. She just wanted to stay at the house. So as the party raged on, there was my mom on the couch in my bedroom with a towel over her head, quietly sleeping. She also attended pretty much every YMCA, Miramar Club, Irvington Little League, or Howe High School sporting event that I was participating in over the years. However, I never saw her really happier than when she would go to Lake Catherine with the family and in Wisconsin for the 2 weeks in the 70s to visit my Aunt Jane, my Uncle Chuck, and my cousins, Tom, Sue, JC, and Terry. Because she and her sister Jane never really lived near each other after high school, this was always a great opportunity for them to spend some time together, enjoy each other's families, and to go antiquing, which they did a lot up there. Terry and I were talking about all the great things that they cooked and the donuts that we ate and enjoyed. It was always just a fantastic time up there. And she loved and admired her sister, and I'm thankful that they remained so close for so many years. My mom had an infectious smile. I got a card from a good friend of mine, and that was one of the things that just brought tears to my eyes. And I noticed it today when we were, or last night when we were putting all the pictures together, and it's just such a great smile. And it just brought a lot of light to the room when she came in. So I've been a beneficiary of all her love, and she will definitely live within you and me for the rest of our lives. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for coming. I'm Tammy, number 4. Mom always said I was her favorite daughter. Always had to remind her I was the only one. Jo Bell was the best mom. She was my rock. She was my best friend. She was an extremely kind, selfless, patient, and loving soul. She made the best desserts. Some of my earliest memories are us being down at Lamb Lake. Dad worked on Saturdays, so we would always pack up the station wagon after watching the Bobby Knight show on Sunday mornings. And we would head to the lake with the lawnmower and other tools in the back. We weren't allowed to get into the water until all the work was done. Then after working, we would swim and ski, and Mom would pull out her baked beans and her homemade potato salad and her brownies, while Dad cooked the hamburgers on the grill. Mom also loved being up north with her sister Aunt Janie for 2 weeks every summer at Lake Catherine. They would cook and clean for us 8 kids and watch us swim and ski. And she and Aunt Janie, they'd also go shopping for antiques. We would go to the ski show in Minocqua at night. And it was always interesting on the morning that we packed up the car to go back to Indiana, because the antiques that Mom bought, they didn't always fit in the car. And always that morning before we'd leave, she'd come upstairs to where all the kids slept in the top floor, and she'd give me some antiques to hide in my luggage, because she didn't want Dad to know that she'd bought some extra pieces. Mom always put other people's needs before hers. She used to warm up the station wagon for Scott and I and scrape all the ice off the windshield and have it all warmed up so we'd have a warm ride on the way to high school. She went grocery shopping several times a week for the elderly neighbors in our neighborhood who were housebound. And we always knew that when she went to deliver the groceries, that she'd be gone for some time because she'd always sit down and talk with him. She loved her flowers, especially her geraniums. And I want to thank Judy Ayers for always helping her with that. I also want to say a quick thank you, Cass.
We also want to say a quick thank you to all of her friends and family that have driven Mom to HOW events, luncheons, and doctor's appointments in all these years. All three of my brothers have done so much, but I also want to say a quick thank you to Jim and Sandy Burke, Bob Ensley, Judy Strange, Sandy Fodias, Judy Ayers, and Carol Jackson, to name a few. Grandma loved to sew. She sewed my mom's prom dress and many of our clothes growing up. We have quilts, curtains, and pillowcases in every color, and she made them for my daughters, which we still have, and we'll never be throwing away. She even made a beautiful quilt out of all my jeans that I wore as a child. We actually just used that this past week. I love it. One very last story about my mom visiting us in Orlando, which shows her spunk. When she was visiting us, we decided to go to Universal Studios, which is where there's rides and roller coasters. And we borrowed a wheelchair so that she would not have to walk. And she and I spent the day riding the Hulk and Dueling Dragons roller coasters. She was 68 years old and had a blast being pushed around Universal and riding rides. Joe loved us very much, granddaughters and mom and brothers. And truly, I mean, this is me going off the cuff, but they are some of the best, most sincere, humble, kind people that I've known. And I think that that's because of Grandma, and just who she was and how she loved them. And truly, she's the reason why they're that way. And that's just, I mean, it goes down generations of people who've been impacted by her and her friends who are here today. And she was just such a blessing to everyone who knew her. And we're just so thankful for her. And we love her very much.
I wish I had gone before you, Tammy. My name is Carol, and I'm Jalon's favorite daughter-in-law. The fact that I'm the only daughter-in-law at the moment is totally irrelevant. I am the other Mrs. Bell. Joe and I used to call each other Mrs. Bell on occasion. I'd call her up and go, "Hello, Mrs. Bell, it's Mrs. Bell." And then we'd go on and talk about just anything and nothing. There were often times when we called each other Mrs. Bell at gatherings, and people would look at us like, "Why are you two so informal? So formal, why do you call each other Mrs. Bell?" And we would just look at each other and wink and smile, like it was our private little joke. I remember when I first joined the Bell family nearly 30 years ago. I got to spend some quality time around the family. I swear I thought they were the Stepford family or the Cleavers. They never said a cross word to each other. They never were angry. They never raised their voice. It was just unbelievable. And the same still holds true today. What you see is true and real and deep. I soon came to realize that they were the product of both of their father Bob's Bell Dynasty talks, focusing on the importance of family, hard work, and character, encouraging his children to look forward to another day to excel. And a product of Joe's gentle, unselfish, loving, motherly hand. Joe loved her children equally and unconditionally. I know that to be eternally true. The connective thread that runs through the Bell family is strong. I absolutely adored my in-laws, and being a part of this family has been the greatest blessing of my life. They say that you can tell how a husband will treat his wife by the way he treats his mother. I felt like I had hit the jackpot, and all the kids are that way. Fiercely protective and devoted to their mom, taking her to doctor's appointments, doing chores at home and at the lakes, helping her with taxes and banking and paperwork, the 1-minute calls throughout the day just to check and see how she was doing, and how Jeff would call his mom and read the grocery ads to her over the phone when she no longer got the ads in the mail. And then the weekly Wednesday dinners with Joe's favorite pizza or burgers, along with a grocery delivery that we, her team of personal shoppers, had picked up from the shopping list. When I would shop for her with my phone in my hand, she would jokingly say, "Well, I'm glad you got there before the hoarders did," as she instructed me to get plenty of whatever the sales or clearance item was that day. Needless to say, we are both equally prepared for a zombie apocalypse, as Steve would say. When I met Joe all those years ago, I found we shared a love of antiques, gardening, good home cooking, and a great love for her son. Joe was warm and loving and funny and welcoming and felt like home. She is the nicest person I ever met. Each year, Joe was always excited to show me the new flowers that were popping up in her garden, how well her tomato and basil plants that I brought her were doing, and how beautiful the geraniums were that Judy Ayers brought every year. I was always amazed that Joe could take a broken off piece of plant, nestle it in the dirt, and within no time, a beautiful new plant would emerge. She had a green thumb for sure and loved her garden. Joe always said that she never met a dessert she didn't like. And everyone that truly knew her knew that to be true. One of her favorite desserts was Cousin Terry's lemon bars. And no, I'm not kidding, Terry. So knowing how much Joe loved lemon, I made some dessert for one of our gatherings down at the lake. I don't even remember what it was, but it had lemon curd in it. She took a bite and was excited about how good it was. And I'm like, oh, I am so pleased. That is so good. So she asked what was in it, and I began to list the ingredients. I told her that one of the ingredients, of course, was lemon juice, and I just used one of those little plastic lemon squeezy things. I swear she almost spit the bite out into her hand. She was absolutely mortified by my use of the little plastic lemon squeezy thing. I kind of sat there stunned thinking, I did not know my mother-in-law was a lemon juice snob, and you were just telling me how much you liked it. But I also noticed she didn't eat anymore. So, forever the persistent one that I am, I made the dessert again for another family get-together, avoiding the little plastic lemon squeezy thing like the plague. First question from Joe before even taking a bite was, so did you use the lemon plastic squeezy thing? I'm like, I did not. And I proudly assured her that I avoided that. As she grabbed her second piece, she said, fresh squeezed lemon juice really is so much better, isn't it? Like a deer caught in the headlights, I looked at her and nodded and said, right? As God is my witness, I swear I thought the next obvious progression in the lemon juice hierarchy was the bottled lemon juice. So I never told her that it wasn't fresh squeezed lemon juice. And I have never made that dessert since. Joe was also a bit of a collector and a saver, and we now realize that this trait runs deep in the Bell family gene pool. She was never wasteful and often said, well, I might need that someday. I often told Jeff that when the day came we were lovingly sifting through her things, that I knew we would surely come across a small box marked, string too short to use. And she loved and kept the Hollywood and pop culture magazines that Aunt Jane used to send her in the mail. She was our phone-a-friend lifeline when we wanted to know who that movie star was in a particular movie, or who was married to who, or basically anything Hollywood that we wanted to know. Joe was the one that I called to find out who the heck Shailene Woodley was and why my Aaron Rodgers would pick her to be engaged to. Of course she knew who she was, what she had starred in, and was shocked, as was I, that the Green Bay quarterback actually was engaged. I caught myself picking up the phone to call her this week when I heard that the engagement was off. In Joe's last days, she presciently stated that she had only 2 days left to live and she didn't want to die in the hospital. So she came home to rest in her own bed, in her own clothes, cared by those that loved her most, with her cat Kitty, resting comfortably in her bedroom doorway, happy that her owner was home. I may have had a bit of a role influencing Joe to rescue the stray cat and bring it inside. But through the years, they loved each other and kept each other good company. That last night, as Joe rested in bed, with Tammy laying on one side of the bed, one side of Joe and me sitting on the other side at the edge of the bed, one of the things we talked about was Joe's urn, that she wanted a blue one, and that she wanted to be up on the mantle, next to Bob, in his urn, and next to the Isaiah Thomas bobblehead statue. Joe and I literally laughed out loud as we explained to Tammy that her father really couldn't stand Isaiah Thomas, and that we lovingly tormented Bob over the years with a bobblehead statue that Jeff and I had picked up at a Pacer game, which Joe and I proudly displayed on the fireplace mantel. That still makes me laugh, and Joe was such a good sport and kept the bobblehead tucked behind Bob's urn all of these years. Joe had a great sense of humor. In her last days and hours, Joe repeatedly said that she wanted to go see her daddy and Bob, and how much she was missing them both. As she laid there, I explained that all of her wishes had been honored. She was at home, in her own bed, no more hospital, no continuing care facilities, no more medications, no more doctors and nurses, no more heroic efforts. And that now it was in God's hands to take her home, and everything was in God's time. With her eyes closed, she nodded her head and said, "Well, I wish he would hurry." I assured her that we would pray for grace and mercy. As Joe rested, drifting in and out of sleep, I gently held her hand and quietly said, "I love you, Mrs. Bell." And without opening her eyes, she said back, "I love you too, Mrs. Bell. I will treasure that moment forever." We were all surprised at how quickly God answered Joe's prayers, but she knew exactly where she was going. She had no fear, and she honestly couldn't wait to get there. I think that in the final moments, the earthly body momentarily struggles, caught in the ether between heaven and earth, clinging to the love that is here and reaching for the love that is in the hereafter. And then, as the poem goes, Joe slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. She went home. We are already missing you so much, Joe, but we will tend to your garden and feed and love your cat and search for that box marked "string too short to use." We will honor you with the lives that we will lead. And we will wait until that beautiful day when we will see you on the other side. I love you, Mrs. Bell.
Thanks, everybody, for your patience. I'll wrap up by reading two letters that we got just this last week. First one is from Jamie Hurdle. "Hi, Jeff. My name is Jamie Hurdle. I'm your cousin Terry's daughter. I just wanted to reach out and express my condolences for your mother's passing. I also wanted to share some of my words surrounding your special mom. My memories of her are always receiving the most thoughtful birthday cards. I was always so impressed with their knowledge of my happenings and life events, which were an ode to how close and intertwined her and my grandma Jane are and how special their bond was. They really are true sisters, sharing everything and maintaining their bond each night through a phone call. Whenever I'd be at Grandma's for the evening, I'd hear the phone ring at around 6. I knew your mom was calling to talk. I can still hear her voice through the phone. It was most kind and excited. 'Hi, Janie,' I heard all the time. I love seeing how happy my grandma was that she maintained that routine every day with someone who knows her for that long. They both have been through so much together. I can't even imagine 84 years of being there for each other and all the ups and downs of life. They certainly have showed me the importance of siblings and staying connected. Whenever my grandma would talk about it, it sounds like I already know her because she sounds just like you." The other letter is from Charlie and Barbara Campbell. Jeff, Steve, Scott, Tammy, Barbara and I are sorry for your mother's passing. However, the fond memories of her will stay with all of us for the rest of our lives. I first met your mother while beginning her first grade at School 62, so I have had the pleasure of knowing and being her friend for 78 years. She was more like a sister to me during all these years. We were in grade school together till the 6th grade when my family moved to the country. When I moved back to Indianapolis, we both went to Howe High School. After Howe, Joe went to Indiana University and I joined the Navy. When I got out of the Navy, I continued my friendship with both your mom and your dad and my many other high school friends. Your mom and dad were married, and if I remember right, Joe was pregnant with Jeff. The four of us had the same high school friends, and we all ran around with each other. We played miniature golf at Rustic Gardens, picnics at the state parks, swimming at the Miramar Swimming Club in Longacre, and monthly parties. We were truly victims of the happy days, the 50s. Jalon Gokumbel was a very unique lady in a class all of her own. All the years that I knew her, I never heard her say anything bad about anyone. She was totally committed to her family and friends. She was honest and dependable and a loyal friend. She was very involved in many activities in high school. She was vice president of her class in 1956. Not only did she raise 4 wonderful kids, Jeff, Steve, Scott, Tammy, she was the office manager and customer relation manager for her husband, Dr. Robert Bell. Without a doubt, our group would be lost without Joe's homemade brownies that she brought to our parties and picnics. During the last few years of her life, Joe had had to deal with not only the passing of her husband, but some very painful health issues, which she preferred not to discuss with anyone. She pretty much kept her health issues to herself and her kids and sister Jane. I finished this letter about my good friend Jalon K. Bell with this. Joe, we all miss you very much, but we thank you for the great memories you have left us, memories we will never forget. We are all grateful that you do not have to deal with the pain any longer and that you will be joining your family and friends that have joined our Maker in heaven. God bless you, Charlie and Barbara Campbell. Thank you very much for being here today, again, taking time out of your busy schedule. Again, Mom loved you guys and the relationships that she had with you. God bless you. Thanks again very much.